What's up, everyone, and welcome back. Let's talk about episode 35 of My Hero Academia. I have a lot of thoughts on this episode. Just a quick programming note so I don't have to talk about this at the end of the video. It feels more natural to be talking about it at the beginning just because it's such a big deal right now. Next week's review of My Hero Academia will be delayed. Originally, I was supposed to move back to Florida this weekend. I talked about it a few times, but the hurricane's coming through. I had to move the trip until next weekend, so hopefully everybody affected by the storm is staying safe, and I hope that everybody is able to avoid the worst of it. But that's not what we're here to talk about today, but still, very important. Life comes before anime. We are on to episode 35 of My Hero Academia. We are in the final exams arc, or the end of term test arc. I know it's got a couple different names, but it's the last arc of season 2 more than likely, as this season is probably only going to be 25 episodes. We're already about 21. I think this is the 21st episode of the season. Excuse me, I can't do math. It's actually the 22nd episode of the season. So there's actually only 3 episodes remaining after this. So only 3 more weeks in My Hero Academia, and then there is going to be a large break. It's probably going to be a short break, actually, because it's looking like they're just going to be doing 26 or 25 episode seasons from here on out, which would be cool. It'll be seasonal, which sucks, but they won't have to do filler, like I know people had a big problem with in Naruto. So anyway, let's talk about episode 35. This episode was called Yayorozu Rising, much like the manga chapter that it adapts parts of. We'll talk about the episode a little bit first. The final exams are underway, and we're treated to 4 fights in this episode. Tokoyami and Sue versus Ectoplasm, Ida and Ojiro versus Powerloader, Yayorozu and Todoroki versus Aizawa, which is the centerpiece of the episode, and finally a small piece of Aoyama and Uraraka versus 13, wherein Aoyama asked an important question that was teased last week. Let's talk first about what I liked about this episode. One of the things I liked about this episode was the first half pacing. I thought that the first half was really focused and concise. It didn't waste any screen time, but didn't rush through a moment of the action. The Ectoplasm fight in particular was perfectly timed and used all of the time that it had in the episode very well. Another thing I liked was the animation. And for an episode with a lot of action sequences packed in, it never felt like the quality was sacrificed for the sake of the action shots. Environments looked developed, characters were fluid, and a lot of the episode's big moments were visually stunning. Another thing I liked, and we'll talk about all the different fights because I liked every single one. We'll start with Tokoyami and Sue's fight. For a fight where not really a lot happens, this fight was very well done in action. It turned out almost exactly how I hoped it would. You know, more strategy than action, but it even surprisingly delivered in terms of action. I thought this was an amazing sequence of the episode. It was a great 5 minutes to start the episode. That was a perfect way to frame this fight. I think this was actually the fight I was the most surprised was good. And I expected it to be good, but not as good as it ended up being. Ida and Ojiro's fight was actually surprisingly good as well. The perfect amount of time was spent focusing on this fight, and there was a brilliantly executed sequence to remember this fight by. It was incredible, and that's all pretty much the fight is that one sequence, but it is a very well done sequence, and I loved it. First half of this episode is a very, very, very surprisingly amazing half of TV. Yayorozu and Todoroki's fights takes up most of the second half of the episode. Actually, I think all of the second half of the episode, actually about 30 seconds of the first half, if I remember correctly, too. And surprisingly enough, we're already 3.5 minutes in without a single mention of the format change, which I think is a phrase that I used about 17 times in the last video. But this is actually the fight I think is least affected by the format change, because in the manga it was pretty much the focus for about 2 chapters in a row, and actually I think parts of a 3rd chapter talked about it too. But there was like almost no interruption when they wrote about this originally, so it felt just as swift as it did on paper. It was one of the things I thought translated the best to the screen as it did, without needing to change the format even, just independent of that. I said this fight was the most personally interesting to me just because of the contrast of personalities and how these two operate, and the obvious bone of quirk erasure that's just thrown into this one, the monkey wrench. That's actually the word I was looking for. It delivered in every way possible, in my opinion. Perhaps most importantly, the character development in this fight is second to none in the entire series up to this point. Don't at me on that. Felt awkward being placed where it did within the arc, though. That's something I'll talk about a little bit later. I also liked how cutaways were used, though they might have been a little bit underused. That was more of a thing about the episode, though. I was looking forward to these scenes because I felt they could just provide interesting commentary and character interaction moments. They don't necessarily take away from the fight. They just serve what the viewer is thinking role is, and they don't detract very heavily from the episode. I did feel that a couple more of these would have been nice, but just given the pacing of the episode, that might have been a challenge to incorporate. So it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. We'll talk quickly about what I didn't like, and there wasn't a lot of things not to like about this episode, but I will say the pacing of the second half of this episode was extremely awkward, I thought. It was way too drastic of a change from the first half. I think that was just a circumstance where this fight was kind of victimized by where it was placed within the sequence of fights. This fight probably either should have been the first half of the episode or toward the end, but you don't want to pack the big two fights next to each other because then the lead up is all boring. So I get why they put this where they did. I just think that they probably should have flipped where these were placed. I think that the second half should have been the first half should have been the second half. That way the first half could be the slow part, you're getting invested, it's really good. I know that you want to build up to the second half being big, but just when you're watching this as a whole later on, if you just binge through the episodes, this episode's going to feel extremely slow, and I think that's a big problem. That's not to say that the fight itself didn't deserve the attention that it got, but it was just that comparatively there was a lot of downtime. That's just it to me. I also really didn't like, and this is actually probably even a bigger complaint to me than the pacing, was that this big reveal that they were supposed to do, that they teased last week, that's a big moment just for character purposes, not even like storyline. This is going to be a recurring story, not to spoil the future or anything, but I feel like that should have just been obvious based on if you watch this episode, you know that this big reveal that they did at the end is going to be a recurring thing, and it just felt like it didn't need to be there. This is the first ever "Do you like Deku" moment that we've had with Uraraka, and it just felt shoved onto this episode. For one, it takes place after the credits and before the preview, which is the strangest sequencing to put a big scene maybe ever. But putting that aside, there's also this big issue that I have with the scene, which is it's never really explained how Aoyama has this random suspicion out of nowhere. They don't elaborate on it ever, like, oh, I see you with him all the time and I know you look up to, like, no, they just are like, you like him, and it's like, that just feels really strange to me. But that aside, there's one other big issue that I had, and this ties back into the cutaway sequences that were a little bit earlier in the episode. Uraraka and Deku were together all episode, and there was like never a scene where they were like, where he was like, good luck out there, or do you feel good about this, or whatever. Like, there was never like this moment of encouragement or even like interaction between them outside of just how they felt about specific fights that they were watching, and I thought that was really disappointing. We could have used a good minute, 30-second, 45-second sequence like that. But in and of itself, it's a great scene. It's shot really well, and it does one thing perfect, which I will say is the music just stopping. That was a great part to me. And then the shot of Uraraka just ending the episode, that worked for it being an episode ender, but I just still feel like it was tacked on. It definitely could have waited. Overall, this was a packed episode, but it really didn't have that many flaws. It did feel at times as though they should have flipped the halves for the sake of pacing, but that doesn't take away from the overall quality of the episode. This is very well done. Yaoyorozu and Todoroki versus Aizawa met expectations, and the other two fights were very well executed as well. I was actually kind of shocked a little bit by how much I enjoyed those fights. I thought they would just be, maybe not filler fights, but they would be interesting fights that we aren't going to really think of all that highly. They were great. They were just flat out great. The overwhelming positives outweigh the minor problems this episode has, so I gave it a 9. It's almost the best version of itself it could be. It's still a step down from like the best episodes that we've gotten in the entire series, though. At the same time, that's not really what we're expecting out of this arc. This arc's going to be a short arc, and it's going to have big moments, but it's not going to be the most amazing, I don't think. So what am I looking forward to? Next week should be an episode that's very akin to what we got in the first half. We're going to wrap up most of the exams from the looks of it, because Deku directly says in the next episode preview that we're going to get most of these fights. We're also going to see portions of the 9th fight in the next episode preview, even though he doesn't directly say that it is going to happen. The dialogue, the translation on that's a little bit iffy, but the fights we're going to get to, at least from what Deku says and what is on screen, is every fight except Deku and Bakugo versus All Might, basically. Uraraka and Aoyama versus 13. Kaminari and Ashido versus the Principal. Koda and Jiro versus Present Mike. And Shoji and Hagakure versus Snipe. Mineta and Sero versus Midnight was shown sequences of in the preview, so take that for what you will. This likely sets the stage for this to be a 4-episode arc. Next week will be episode 3, the final episode being Bakugo and Deku versus All Might, which will get its own episode. That's pretty much inevitable because it's the main character versus his mentor and his rival. Rival's also involved. He's on a team with his rival, so like, you know, that's kind of inevitable that was going to get its own episode. I don't think that there's any argument with that. Like, that was just something that we all expected to happen. So, I'm going to expect lightning quick pacing and a lot of great individual moments. Might not be the greatest episode in terms of quality. It's going to be probably even a step below this week's episode with just the fact that it's going to be jumping around so much, and it's not going to be, like, ultra important to the story in the end of it all, other than depending on how they discuss Uraraka's reaction next episode. I think that actually might be the most important thing that happens next week. So, what am I expecting? I don't think it's going to be a great, fantastic, amazing, well-remembered episode that we're going to be watching and talking about as, like, one of the best episodes. Like, when we all saw the Shoto Todoroki origin episode, we all said this is a classic. This is going to be the episode that we have to hold the future episodes up to. I don't think it's going to be anything like that, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be really fun. It's going to just whip through. There's going to be a lot of action going on. It's going to be super investing. But I look forward to episodes like that, too. Those are just as important sometimes. So, that does it for this review. As I said, next week's will be delayed. Talked about that in the beginning of the video. So, that being said, what did you guys think about this episode? What'd you like? What didn't you like? How'd you feel about it overall? Were there things you felt could have been improved? Are there things that you actually liked more than you expected? How'd you feel about it? What are you expecting in the next episode? Leave it down below in the comments section. Thanks everyone for watching. See you next week where we will talk once again about My Hero Academia.